My name is Molly. If you're sitting down with me today, I want you to take a second, look at whatever you're holding in your hands. Maybe it's a warm cup of coffee. Maybe it's just your phone. And I want you to ask yourself a really honest question. Have you ever realized in a single quiet heartbeat that you were only ever loved for what you could provide, rather than for who you actually are? It's a heavy way to start a conversation, I know. But I'm sitting here on my front porch today, looking out at the morning sun hitting the valley, and I'm holding this old, chipped ceramic mug. The handle has been cracked for years. Most people would have thrown it out the second it broke, but I keep it because it reminds me of the exact moment my life split into two distinct chapters. The chapter where I allowed myself to be used as background infrastructure for other people's happiness. And the chapter where I finally walked away. For 29 years, I was the quiet one in the Bryan family. I was the daughter who smoothed things over. The one who took the smaller room, the one who listened to my sister Vanessa's endless dramas, while my own life played out in the margins. My mother had this incredibly subtle, elegant way of moving through the world. She didn't scream, she didn't throw things. Instead, she used a soft, reasonable voice to hand you an execution order for your own autonomy, making you feel like you were the selfish one for wanting to keep what was yours. And that brings me to the night everything broke. It started with a family dinner invitation. Not a frantic text, not an argument. Just a beautifully phrased message from my mother asking me to come home, claiming it was time we became one family again. I remember sitting at that long, polished mahogany table, smelling the roast chicken, thinking that maybe, just maybe, the distance I had fought so hard to put between us had finally taught them how to respect me. But it wasn't a reconciliation dinner. It was an ambush. Vanessa was sitting across from me, looking pale, her hands folded tightly in her lap. My mother set down the serving dish, looked me dead in the eye, and in the exact same casual tone she would use to ask someone to pass the salt, she looked at me and said, "Molly, this baby isn't yours to keep. Vanessa earned her. You owe this family." Imagine hearing those words while you are 8 months pregnant. Imagine feeling your baby kick against your ribs, while the woman who gave birth to you tells you that your child belongs to someone else because your sister's life is messy and you are the one who is supposed to fix it. They didn't view me as a mother, they viewed me as a resource. An asset to be liquidated and redistributed because Vanessa needed it more. If you've ever had to earn your place in your own family, if you've ever been told that your pain doesn't matter because someone else's convenience is more important, I want you to do something for me right now. Drop a comment below and type the word boundaries. Just that one word. Because sometimes typing it out is the very first step toward realizing you are allowed to exist without apologizing for the space you take up. I didn't scream at her that night. I didn't burst into tears and beg them to understand. When you grow up in a house like mine, you learn very quickly that tears are just currency for people who love drama. They feed on your reaction. They want you to get defensive because it gives them a foothold to argue. So, I did the one thing my mother never expected me to do. I stayed entirely silent. I sat there at the foot of the table where I had been placed at every family gathering since I was 11 years old. And I let the silence stretch out until it became uncomfortable for them. I watched my father pour his fourth glass of bourbon, his eyes tracking the amber liquid instead of looking at his pregnant daughter. I watched my sister Vanessa adjust her perfect hair, refusing to meet my gaze, and in that heavy, suffocating silence, a switch flipped inside my mind. I realized that the passive, accommodating girl they thought they could break was gone. I wasn't going to fight them on their terms. I was going to let them think they were winning while I quietly prepared to dismantle their entire world from the inside out. Grab your coffee, stay with me, because the story of how a single, forgotten digital footprint buried their entire plan is something I've never told anyone out loud until today. To understand how my mother could look at me across a dinner table and demand my unborn child, you have to understand the physical and psychological architecture of the house I grew up in. It wasn't a home, it was a curated gallery dedicated to the preservation of my sister Vanessa's ego. If you walked down the main hallway that led from our kitchen to my parents' master bedroom, you would pass 28 framed photographs. I know the exact number because when you are the invisible child, you spend a lot of time counting the things that prove your invisibility. 23 of those photographs were of Vanessa alone. Vanessa at her piano recitals. Vanessa wearing her homecoming queen sash. Vanessa smiling her flawless, high-contrast smile that my father always captured with his expensive camera equipment. 2 photos were of me alone. One was the 2 of us together, and the remaining 2 were standard performative family portraits taken on the brick steps of our church on Easter mornings. My single first-grade school portrait, the one where my hair was a little frizzy and my smile was slightly crooked, hung on the narrow back staircase wall by the heavy door that led down to the basement. It was a place where guests rarely went, a place where things were stored out of sight. My mother had a phrase she loved to use when people asked about the difference between us. She would smooth down Vanessa's hair, smile that polished real estate broker smile, and say, "Vanessa is the easy one. Molly is the one who teaches me patience." For a long time, I actually thought that was a compliment. I thought teaching someone patience meant I was special, that I possessed a quiet depth she valued. It takes a long time to realize that when a narcissistic parent says you teach them patience, what they really mean is that your boundaries, your distinct identity, and your refusal to fit perfectly into their curated script are an inconvenience to them. Vanessa took piano lessons from the age of 6. When she was 14, she gave a recital at a beautiful historic theater downtown. My father booked the entire front row, and my mother bought a silk dress specifically for the occasion that she still talked about a decade later. I didn't play the piano, I wrote stories. I started writing them in small, spiral-bound notebooks. When I was 6, the exact same year Vanessa started music. When I was 15, I won a regional writing prize for an essay I had submitted to a statewide contest run by the Oregon Council of Teachers of English. It was a huge deal for me. The awards dinner was on a Friday night in May, and I remember holding the invitation, my hands shaking with excitement, thinking this was finally my turn. But my mother couldn't attend. It turned out Vanessa had a hair appointment at a high-end salon downtown that had already been moved twice, and my mother insisted it couldn't be rescheduled again because Vanessa had a crucial social event that weekend. My English teacher was the one who drove me to the banquet. She sat next to me in the crowded banquet hall, ordered me an extra dessert, and clapped the loudest when they read my name. When I came home that night, holding my gold-embossed certificate, my mother was standing in the kitchen on the phone with the salon manager. She looked up at me, gave me that empty, professional smile and whispered, "Sweetheart, you understand, don't you? Your sister had absolutely no one else to do her hair." I went to my room, folded that certificate into a tiny square, and pushed it to the absolute bottom drawer of my nightstand. It stayed there, completely dark and forgotten, for 14 long years. I remember sitting on the back porch steps that exact night, staring at a single store-bought cupcake I'd bought myself, watching the frost melt under the porch light while the muffled sound of my family laughing at Vanessa's jokes drifted through the closed kitchen window. It was a tiny, sharp micro-trauma, a parasite on my teenage heart that taught me a dangerous lesson. My achievements were a burden to them, while Vanessa's ordinary life events were national holidays. My father was a prominent cosmetic dentist in town. The brass sign on his office door featured a beautiful family portrait. When I was a kid, I was in that photo, standing behind a small, velvet-lined dental chair, partially obscured by my mother's shoulder. But by the time I was 28, the portrait was retaken without my knowledge. I drove past his office one afternoon, 3 months into my pregnancy, and saw the new sign glinting in the spring sun. I was completely gone from the frame. The receptionist later told me, under her breath, that my father had casually told the staff I had moved away. I hadn't moved. I had only stopped picking up their toxic phone calls. My father wasn't an explicitly cruel man. He was a coward. He was a quiet, checked-out ghost of a father who, whenever a hard emotional question was asked, would slowly reach for his glass of bourbon, look at the floor, and murmur, "Your mother and I will have to think about that." He had been reciting that exact sentence for 38 years, using the amber liquid as a shield against any form of real accountability. By the time I was 14, I had completely stopped expecting an answer from him. I learned to navigate the house like an intruder, keeping my thoughts locked away where my mother couldn't evaluate them or use them as currency for Vanessa's endless emotional upgrades. If you've ever felt entirely invisible, you know how terrifying it is when someone finally looks at you and actually sees you. It almost makes you want to run away because you've built such a thick armor out of your isolation. That was me until October of 2020, when I met Owen Bryan at a small, crowded coffee shop in Northeast Portland. I was 24, sitting at a corner table with my notebook, trying to lose myself in my writing. Owen was 26, pacing around while reading a coffee column on his phone, some piece by a writer, he told me. Later, he was trying to imitate. He wasn't paying attention, spun around, and knocked his heavy ceramic mug directly into mine. The impact sent my coffee flying across my notes, and my favorite mug hit the hardwood floor, chipping the handle completely. He spent the next 20 minutes apologizing, entirely mortified. "I'm not usually like this," he said, scrubbing the table with napkins. Then he paused, looked at me, and sighed. "Actually, that's a lie. I am usually exactly like this. I was trying to sound smooth. Can I please buy you another?" I kept that chipped mug. Today, 6 years later, it still sits right on our kitchen windowsill in West Lynn. The house we bought together after we got married. It's the very same window our daughter, Iris, will look out of every single morning when she grows up. On our second date, Owen did something no one in my biological family had ever done. He showed me his raw, uncurated vulnerability. We were sitting in a vinyl booth at a little Italian restaurant, and his voice cracked as he told me his mother, Beatrice, had just been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. He didn't try to hide his tears or play the tough guy. He just wept. I didn't pull away. I reached across the table, took his hand, and held it tightly. That was the exact second I knew I had found someone who lived in reality, not a performance. A month later, he brought me to meet his parents, Conrad and Beatrice Bryan, at their home in Beaverton. Beatrice was in temporary remission then. She had thinned out from the treatments. But she was lit from the inside in that rare way some women are, after they've stared death in the face and looked away unbroken. Conrad, a retired pastor, was so incredibly gentle. He called me ma'am 3 times in the first hour until I laughed and told him to stop. When I went into the kitchen to help Beatrice, she set me to slicing apples for a pie. She turned down the flame on the stove, looked at me with an expression that would anchor my soul for years to come, and said, Owen has been so quiet since we got the diagnosis. He doesn't tell me everything. But you make him talk, Molly. Don't ever stop making him talk, will you? I promised her I wouldn't. We ate dinner, and Conrad said grace in a voice that didn't perform for an audience. It was the first time in my life I understood what genuine love sounded like when it wasn't being used to sell an image. Beatrice passed away in March of 2024. The cancer had come roaring back the previous autumn and took her in 5 short months. She was only 65. My mother actually showed up to the funeral, but she didn't come to grieve. She wore a pristine white blouse and a cream-colored skirt, looking like she was staging an open house. When she left, she subtly slid Beatrice's vintage green Pyrex casserole dish into a Whole Foods tote bag and walked out with it. She never returned it. She never mentioned it. And back then, swallowed by grief, I didn't have the strength to confront her about it. When Owen proposed to me on the foggy boardwalk at Cannon Beach, he cried through the entire sentence. I said yes before he could even finish. When I called my mother to tell her, her very first question wasn't if I was happy. It was, is he well established, Molly? What's his upward mobility? Vanessa congratulated me with her arms tightly crossed, her eyes glued to her phone screen. In a tone I would only truly understand much later, she muttered. He's cute, Molly. He's actually really cute. Where did you say you met him again? She kept checking her phone every 2 minutes during our engagement brunch. At the time, I assumed she was just having a petty argument with her real estate broker boyfriend, Spencer. I had no idea she had already broken up with him that exact week, keeping it a secret from the family because she had already set her sights on a completely different target. My husband. 5 months after the funeral came our wedding, but it was the rehearsal dinner where the cracks in the universe began to show. We had booked a private room at a gorgeous vineyard resort north of Newburgh, overlooking the rolling hills. There were 40 guests. Owen was laughing, his arm draped over my chair, and Vanessa, acting as my maid of honor in a sage green gown, had just finished a flawless, tearful toast that earned a standing ovation from the room. I remember finding her crying in the bathroom 10 minutes before that toast, and I had gently patted her back, telling her how sweet it was that she was getting this emotional for me. I was so blind. Near the end of the evening, the waiter mentioned we were running low on the specific Pinot Noir Owen had selected. Owen volunteered to run down to the cellar to grab a few more bottles since the sommelier had given him a private tour the afternoon before. He kissed my forehead, whispered, "I'll be right back," and left the room at exactly 9:43 p.m. 2 minutes later, at 9:45 p.m., Vanessa stood up from the head table, smoothing her dress, and told the table she needed to step out to fix her makeup. She followed him down there. She cornered him in the dim, stone-walled corridor, pushed herself against him, and kissed him. Owen told me the entire truth the very next morning at 6:18 a.m., sitting in the passenger seat of our rental car in his pajamas, his hands shaking so violently he couldn't look at me until I physically touched his face. He said the second she touched him, he pushed her away so hard she hit the wine rack. He told her if she ever came near him again, he would dismantle her life. He told me he wanted to tell me the night before, but he couldn't bear to ruin our wedding day. He looked at me, tears in his eyes, and said it was my call whether we walked down the aisle or called the whole thing off. I made my choice in the next 10 minutes. I looked into his eyes, saw the absolute terror and honesty bleeding out of him, and I believed him. We got married at 3 p.m. that afternoon. Vanessa stood right beside me, handed me my ring with a serene smile, and gave another beautiful toast at the reception. She even danced with Conrad and kissed Owen on the cheek for our professional photographer. We left for Big Sur the next morning. thinking the nightmare was behind us. What neither of us knew, what no one would know for nearly 3 years, was that someone else had been standing in the dark shadows of that stone corridor outside the wine cellar. Someone who heard a sentence that kept them awake for years. Fast forward to April of 2026. The text message from my mother arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. I hadn't stepped foot in my parents' house in 14 months. The words were written in a tone that was far too soft, far too sweet to be authentic. "Sweetheart, your father and I want to host you on Saturday. Just the four of us. Well, five with Owen. It's time we became one family again. Please come. 6 p.m., wear something comfortable." I read it 3 times before showing it to Owen, who was standing at the kitchen counter slicing fresh strawberries for our breakfast. I was exactly 8 months and 1 day into the longest, most exhausting spring of our lives. I was heavily pregnant with our daughter. Owen read the screen over my shoulder, set the knife down, and asked if I wanted him to come with me. I told him no. I told him I needed to face them alone. He didn't argue with me, but looking back, he absolutely should have. I drove the 12 miles from West Lynn to Lake Oswego that Saturday under a heavy gray Pacific Northwest sky. When I pulled into the driveway, the dashboard clock read 5:53 p.m. The rain stopped just as I cut the engine, and the pink rhododendrons in the front yard were drooping from the wet air. The exact ones my mother always bragged had won her a ribbon at the local garden club. The front door was unlatched, slightly open. No one came out to greet me. From the hallway, I could hear Vanessa's distinct, high-pitched laugh echoing from the dining room. When I walked in, I saw the table had been set with our family's formal wedding china. My mother only brought that china out for Christmas, Easter, or what she performatively called appointments with grandchildren. There were 4 place settings positioned meticulously around the polished mahogany table, and Owen's plate had been set a little farther down the side, isolated as if he were an afterthought added at the very last second. "You look absolutely glowy, sweetheart," my mother said, stepping out of the kitchen with a green Pyrex casserole dish. The exact one she had stolen from Beatrice's funeral. The smell of chicken, rosemary, and lemon billowed into the room, a scent so unmistakably belonging to my late mother-in-law that I had to place both hands on my pregnant stomach just to steady myself. Then, before I even noticed the food, my eyes drifted to the silver frame on the mantel. It was a photo from Easter 2024. In the original photo, I had been standing proudly between my parents. In this new, brightly polished frame, my face had been entirely cropped out by the silver edge. Vanessa was now the absolute center of the image. Vanessa walked toward me, her arms wide open. Her hug lasted 6 seconds too long. She intentionally pressed her flat stomach tightly against my 8-month pregnant belly, leaned in, and whispered directly into my ear, so quiet that no one else could hear. "She's going to be so beautiful, Molly. And she's going to look just like him." The baby kicked hard against the inside of my ribs the exact second Vanessa pulled away. I didn't flinch, and I didn't say a word. I just sat down at the designated place my mother had chosen for me, the very foot of the table where I had been forced to sit at every single family dinner since I was 11 years old. My mother settled into her chair at the head of the table, smoothing her napkin, and reached out to take my father's hand. She looked across the polished mahogany, straight through me, and smiled. "We have something very important to discuss, sweetheart," she said, her voice dropping into that calm, transactional register she used when she was closing a real estate deal. "As a family." Then Vanessa stood up. She had clearly practiced this. She spoke for nearly 3 minutes, pausing for tears at the exact moments she felt her grief deserved them. She talked about her husband, Drew, a quiet man in finance who looked, dressed, and styled his hair exactly like my Owen. She talked about how their marriage was failing, how her body didn't work the way mine did, and how they had been trying to conceive for 2 years. I caught the math immediately. Vanessa and Drew had only been married for 18 months. 2 years was a deliberate, dramatic stretch. "You have always been the giver in this family, Molly," Vanessa said, refolding her linen napkin with trembling hands. "And we are asking you, your sister and your mother, for the most extraordinary gift one sister can ever give another. We want to do a private adoption. No public paperwork. The baby will live with me, she will call me Mom, and you will be the perfect aunt. You're young, Molly. You have so much time to have more children with Owen. Vanessa doesn't." I sat completely still, watching the performance unfold. But then my mother made a crucial slip. She leaned forward and whispered, "We've already spoken to a close friend at the diocesan office, sweetheart. It can all be handled quietly, in a way that is gentle for everyone." The second the word diocesan left her mouth, a freezing wave of absolute clarity washed over me. My family was Methodist. We had been Methodist for 4 generations on my mother's side. Methodists don't have a diocesan office. Vanessa had been sneaking around, talking to a Catholic priest completely outside of our congregation, outside of her own marriage, and months before this dinner was ever planned. They had been constructing a trap for my child long before they ever sent that sweet invitation. My mother looked at me, completely unblinking. "We are just asking you to give your sister a chance to be a mother, Molly." I looked over at Drew. His face was the exact color of dishwater. He was staring intently at the rim of his water glass, completely paralyzed. He hadn't said a single word since the opening prayer. Looking at him, I realized the chilling truth. Drew had been built to be a placeholder in this family, and he had been dragged into this dining room without ever being told what the actual conversation was going to be. I set my water glass down on the table. The sound of the glass hitting the wood seemed to echo in the quiet room. I forced myself to breathe slowly, making sure my voice was completely flat, completely devoid of the chaotic anger tearing through my chest. "No," I said. The room went entirely dead silent. "The answer is no," I repeated, looking directly at my mother. "It will be no tomorrow. It will be no in a year. I came here to share a meal, and I am leaving in exactly 5 minutes. Vanessa, I am deeply sorry that you have struggled to conceive. That grief is real. But this baby belongs to Owen and me. She will be ours the day she is born, the day after that, and every single day for the rest of her life. I am never having this conversation again." My father slowly set his bourbon glass down, refusing to meet my eyes. My mother's face went completely flat. The soft, maternal polish she had been performing for the last hour slid off her features like a damp napkin. "You owe this family, Molly," she hissed, her hand still resting on Beatrice's stolen casserole dish. "And that baby, she was never just yours." I started to push my chair back to stand up. I have replayed the exact second before the slap 1,000 times in my mind. I used to think that if I had just moved a half-second faster, the entire trajectory of the next year would have been different. But the truth is, my mother had been waiting 29 years to lift her hand against me. The exact moment was completely incidental. Her hand was already on its way before I ever said the word no. The heavy oak chair legs dragged loudly against the hardwood. Drew started to stand up to intervene. But my mother's right hand flew across the space between us. She slapped me with the exact same hand that had been holding the warm casserole dish a second before. Her palm was still hot from it. My head snapped violently sideways. The next thing I felt was the sharp, varnished edge of the solid oak table slamming directly into my 8-month pregnant belly as gravity took me down. My water glass tipped, sending a sheet of cold liquid across the tablecloth, and the silver salt cellar rolled away as I instinctively twisted my body, pulling both arms tight to cover my stomach before I hit the floor. I went down hard on the old hardwood. The exact planks my grandfather had laid with his own knees as a wedding gift for my parents in 1968. For a terrifying count of 3, I couldn't feel her move. I counted 1, 2, 3. On the count of 4, she kicked hard against my palm. I let out a ragged breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The dark bruise on my cheek was already starting to throb and bloom under the skin. My back ached, my left shoulder was radiating pain, and the distinct shape of my mother's long fingers was already settling into my flesh. Yet, nobody moved to help me up. My father simply reached for the crystal decanter and kept pouring his bourbon. The amber liquid filled his glass for the 5th time, and the low-hanging chandelier caught the surface of it, throwing a deceptive, honey-colored light across the ruined tablecloth. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at his wife. He just stared into the alcohol. And Vanessa never stood up. Her hands remained perfectly folded in her lap, her face completely composed. She was the exact same girl who had cried in the bathroom at the resort 3 years prior, using her tears to control the room, waiting for someone else to clean up the mess. "Get up," my mother said, her voice dropping into a chilly, commanding tone as she stared down at me. "You're making an absolute scene." I didn't get up the way she wanted me to. I didn't stand up and grant her the dignity of a face-to-face argument. Instead, I rolled onto my hands and knees on the very same hardwood floor where I had first learned to walk as a toddler. I began to crawl. The dining room was exactly 12 feet across to the narrow doorway of the guest powder room. I made that entire distance on my hands and knees. 8 months pregnant, my palms pressing into the cold wood, occasionally lifting one hand to cradle my stomach whenever Iris kicked. I pulled myself up, using the white-painted doorframe, stepped inside the tiny room, and locked the heavy brass deadbolt behind me. I sat down on the closed lid of the toilet, my hands shaking violently as I checked my fingers for blood. There wasn't any, and that was the exact second my mother lost me forever. I hadn't lost her when I was 10, and she labeled me her trial of patience. I hadn't lost her at 15 when she abandoned my writing award for a hair appointment. I lost her right there, on the floor my grandfather had built. The powder room hadn't changed in 15 years. It still smelled of lavender towels and performative peace. Hanging directly above the toilet was a small wooden plaque featuring a Bible verse my mother had put up when I was 11. "Honor thy mother." The frame was slightly mismatched. A darker wood than the original one that a clumsy guest had knocked off the wall during my engagement brunch 2 years back. I stared at that hypocritical verse, my cheek throbbing, and realized I had 3 choices. I could call Owen and he would come, he would weep, and he would hold me. I could call the police, but the strength to articulate the systemic trauma of my family wasn't in me yet. So I bypassed Owen's name. I bypassed 911. I scrolled down and clicked on Pastor Conrad Bryan. He answered on the very second ring. "Molly, tell me where you are." "I'm at my parents' house," I whispered, pressing my hand against the rising bruise on my face. "I'm locked in the bathroom." "She hit me, Pastor. I need you here. And I need you to bring everything you kept." There was a long, heavy pause on the line. I could hear him taking 3 slow, deliberate breaths on the other end before he spoke. When he did, his voice carried the exact same unshakable weight as the day he said grace at Thanksgiving. "Molly," he said softly, "I have been waiting 3 years for you to ask that question." I am walking out my front door in 5 minutes. Where do I meet you? Your house or the hospital? I hadn't even thought about the medical reality yet. But Conrad was a man who had guided a wife through the dark halls of terminal illness. He knew what I needed before I even recognized it myself. Providence St. Vincent, I told him. 53 minutes, he replied. Do not tell a soul in that house that I am coming. I unlocked the door, walked right past the dining room, where my father was silently nursing his fifth bourbon and my mother sat frozen by her stolen casserole dish, and walked out into the April rain. I called Owen from the car, telling him to meet me at the emergency room. By 7:54 p.m., I was tucked into a hospital bed in room 412. The fetal monitor was hooked up, regular and rhythmic, reading a perfect 138 beats per minute. Owen was kneeling right beside the mattress, his face buried in my sheets, weeping in that quiet, broken way men do when they haven't cried since their mother's funeral. Dr. Holloway, a steady woman with reading glasses, resting on a silver chain, finished documenting the handprint on my face and told us she was keeping me overnight for observation. That was the exact moment Conrad walked into the room. He was wearing his formal clergy collar, and he was carrying a weathered brown paper bag. He didn't say a word to Owen. He walked straight over to the rolling bedside table, reached into the bag, and pulled out an old black iPhone 8 with a web of cracks running across the top right corner. Molly, Conrad said, his eyes filled with a deep, sorrowful intensity. I am going to show you what I have carried for 3 years. And then I am going to ask for your forgiveness for the part I played in keeping it quiet to protect a false peace. I remember my grandfather sitting on the edge of his workbench years ago, blowing sawdust off a piece of oak, looking at me and saying, Molly, remember this. The quietest person in the room is usually the one holding all the keys. Conrad tapped the screen of the ancient phone. It whined to life, revealing a single video saved from April 28, 2023, at 9:51 p.m. The exact night of our rehearsal dinner. I went down to the wine cellar looking for Owen because he had been gone too long, Conrad explained, his hands steady around the cracked device. I walked down the steps quietly. I heard Vanessa before I saw her. I heard the kiss, and I heard Owen throw her against the racks and tell her he would destroy her if she ever touched him again. Owen ran up the back stairs. I pulled Vanessa out into the shadows of the corridor. I told her that her sister was upstairs in a wedding gown and that she would never act like a thief in this family again. And then she said this. He pressed play. The video was 23 seconds of near total darkness, the phone clearly held down at Conrad's hip. But Vanessa's voice rang out with absolute, chilling clarity. I'm going to have everything she has, Pastor. Her 3-year-old voice sneered from the speaker. One way or another, even if I have to wait 10 years. You can tell her if you want. She won't believe you. Mom won't believe you. She never does. The audio from the cracked iPhone 8 had barely faded when a shadow fell across the threshold of room 412. My mother stood there, a pastel get-well card and a small teddy bear clutched in her hands. Her jaw dropped as she looked at Conrad, her eyes darting instantly to the glowing screen in his palm. She didn't say a word, but her fingers twitched toward the table, her real estate instincts screaming at her to grab the physical evidence and destroy it. Conrad didn't even look up. He simply placed his broad, weathered hand flat over the phone, anchoring it to the surface. My mother froze. Janelle, Conrad said, his voice dropping into a register that felt less like a pastor and more like a judge. Sit down in that chair by the window. You will hear what I have to say to your family, and then you will speak. Not before. She walked over to the vinyl chair, her spine perfectly straight, her knees locked together, the teddy bear trapped against her chest like a shield. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at Owen. She stared directly out the window into the dark, rain-slicked parking lot. Conrad didn't stop at the video. He swiped open the phone's legacy voicemail archive. There are 4 messages left on my old account, Janelle. Let's listen to them together. The first voicemail played. It was dated May 6, 2023. 1 week after Owen and I returned from our honeymoon. Vanessa's voice was brisk, tight, and completely corporate. Pastor Conrad, this is Vanessa. I need to talk to you about Owen. He's making a massive mistake. Please call me back. Conrad hadn't called her. The second message played. December 26, 2023, at 1:32 in the morning. Vanessa's voice was heavily slurred. Pastor, it's Vanessa. She doesn't deserve him. You know it. I know it. You were the one who pulled me out of that cellar. You remember. Good night, Pastor. The third message from September of 2025, exactly 4 weeks before Vanessa's wedding to Drew. Pastor Conrad, Drew and I have been trying. It hasn't worked. I think about that cellar more than I should. I shouldn't be telling you this. Don't call me back. Then came the final voicemail, dated February 14th, 2026, Valentine's Day, just 2 months before the ambush dinner. Vanessa's voice was completely sober, quiet, and terrifyingly calculated. Pastor Conrad, I know we haven't talked. I want to let you know Molly is pregnant. She told everyone at brunch, but I didn't want to call you then. Mom and I have a plan. Please don't get in our way. We've been working on this for months. The baby will be safe. Better than safe. She'll be wanted. Goodbye. The message clicked off. The only sound in room 412 was the rhythmic, steady beep-beep of the fetal monitor keeping track of my daughter's heart. Owen slowly slid his own phone onto the table next to his father's. He looked at me, his face pale, his voice barely a whisper. Molly, there's one more thing. I thought I was protecting our peace by blocking her and keeping this quiet. I see now that I was just protecting them. He opened a folder labeled simply with the letter V. It contained 53 text messages spanning 3 years. I scrolled through them. They came in frantic clusters. A text from June of 2023. You don't owe her your whole life. We both know it. A photograph from September of 2024 showing Vanessa standing directly at the reception desk of Owen's downtown financial firm with the caption, I came to bring you coffee. You weren't here. The receptionist said you were in Tacoma. I miss you. And the very last text, dated March 22nd, 2026, less than a month before they cornered me at the mahogany table. She doesn't deserve to carry her. I do. I let Owen's phone fall gently onto the white hospital blanket. The understanding settled into my soul the exact way a heavy stone drops through still water, landing with a muted, irreversible thud. My sister Vanessa hadn't actually wanted a baby to fulfill some deep maternal longing. She had wanted my baby. She hadn't wanted a husband because she loved Drew. She had wanted my husband. And when she realized she could absolutely never have him, she had painstakingly constructed a parallel life out of a man who looked like him, dressed like him, and worked in the exact same field. The child she had claimed was the desperate hope of her life. Was never about motherhood. It was the closest she could ever get to having a child with Owen. She wanted to steal my entire existence. Conrad didn't let the silence linger. He reached over, picked up his phone, and dialed Drew. He put it on speaker. It didn't even finish a full second ring before Drew answered, his voice completely raw and exhausted. Pastor Conrad? Drew, Conrad said firmly, I need you to come to Providence St. Vincent right now, room 412. Molly is here. She is safe. Owen and I are here too. Please come. There was a heavy pause. In the background, I could hear the rhythmic thrum of windshield wipers and passing traffic. Drew had been driving in aimless circles. around the hills for over 2 hours, ignoring the frantic text messages blowing up his phone from Vanessa. "I'm 18 minutes away," he whispered, and hung up. When Drew arrived at 8:31 p.m., he looked completely unraveled. He stopped dead at the foot of my bed, his eyes dropping to the dark, swollen handprint staining my left cheek. He sat down in the empty chair next to Owen and watched as Conrad played the 23-second video, followed by the 4 voicemails in sequence. Then Owen handed him his phone screen, letting him scroll through the 53 text messages in the V folder. Drew sat completely frozen for 4 minutes. He didn't blink. He didn't speak a single word as the digital clock above the door clicked from 8:39 to 8:43. He stopped on a photograph taken on the morning of his own wedding. A picture he had snapped of his beautiful bride in the church vestibule. In the background of the image, visible right over Vanessa's white lace shoulder, was her phone screen. The text bubble she was typing read, "I wish it was you instead." "I took that photo because I thought she looked beautiful," Drew said, his voice terrifyingly calm, though his jaw tightened until the bone showed against his skin. "I never read the background. I thought she was texting her college roommate. I am the only person who didn't know." He didn't say goodbye to my mother. He didn't look back. He just slid his phone into his gray vest pocket, turned around, and walked out of the room. The heavy door clicked shut behind him, and he filed for divorce on the 4th of May, leaving Vanessa with absolutely nothing but the wreckage of her own design. Owen then called my father, putting him on speakerphone. Conrad calmly summarized the entire evening, reading out the timestamps of the text logs and the contents of the voicemails. When Conrad finished, my father let out a broken, ragged sigh that vibrated through the cheap hospital speaker. "I knew about the wine cellar, Owen," my father whispered, his voice cracking completely. "Janelle told me a month after the wedding. I told her to leave it alone. I told her Molly didn't need to know. I've been a complete coward. I've been a coward for your entire life, Molly. I am so sorry. I am 29 years too late." He told my mother he was checking into the Heathman Hotel that night and would send for his things on Monday. The line went dead. Suddenly, something behind my mother's eyes snapped. She lunged across the small space toward the rolling table, her manicured fingers clawing for the iPhone 8. But Owen was already on his feet, his broad shoulders completely blocking her path before she could close the distance. At that exact moment, the door burst open. Vanessa stood there, her mascara running down her face in dark streaks, having raced up from the parking lot. She looked at the phones, looked at the cold, unyielding faces in the room, and slid down the doorframe until she was sitting flat on the hospital linoleum. "Turn it off," Vanessa wept, covering her ears. "Please, just turn it off." "Go home," I told them both, my voice entirely flat. "Not to my house. To wherever you live now. Don't call me. Don't show up. If you come to the hospital when she is born, security will remove you. Goodbye, Mom." They walked out, leaving the pastel card on the chair and the teddy bear on the floor. On the 24th of May, at exactly 11:11 p.m., Iris Beatrice Bryan was born into a completely quiet, safe world. She was late preterm, weighing 5 pounds and 14 ounces, breathing entirely on her own, and crying with a fierce, beautiful strength. Owen cut the cord, held her against his chest, and then walked her out into the hallway where Conrad was sitting with his hands resting on his knees. He placed our daughter directly into her grandfather's trembling arms. Today, Iris is exactly 1 week old. She is sleeping peacefully in my arms right now as the morning sun slowly creeps over the Willamette Valley outside her nursery window. Hanging safely on the wall right above her changing table is my high school writing certificate. The one that spent 14 years folded up in a dark, forgotten drawer. Owen framed it and hung it up without me even having to ask. Some families aren't actually your family. They are just the genetic place you came from. The real family, the one that counts, is the one that waits patiently in a sterile hospital hallway with their hands on their knees. It's the one that drives through a storm with a phone older than your marriage, just to shield you from a lie. I had to fall hard on a hardwood floor my grandfather laid in 1968 to finally find them, but looking at my daughter's eyes, I would do it all over again. Thank you for sitting with me today. If you have a story like mine, a family you had to completely walk away from just to save your own soul, share it in the comments below. I promise I will read it. Take care of yourselves out there.